I don't know if you play roulette or whatever, but you have chips to put on the table.
Mm-hmm.
And nobody's going to tell you how to do it. And what you have to do is to say, can I find somebody to say, my cards ends if you want. How would you play it? What would you try to do with it? Try to be in the position of somebody else and then see how they manage to succeed. It's not where you were born that dictate what you will become.
Yeah.
It's what you aspire to be, and then you have to take the ways to get there. If you, to some extent, don't care about the outcome, then ask yourself what your employee will care about it. I mean,
Yeah.
Human
That's
nature.
Interesting. Welcome, everyone, to another episode of the Tech Leaders Playbook. Today, we have a special guest, Michel Langlois, from rural Quebec to redefining architecture of the global internet. Michel has spent 35 years shaping how we build, scale, and lead in tech, with leadership roles at Cisco, Juniper, and Calix. As the author of Beyond the Code, he brings a rare mix of engineering rigor, organizational clarity, and people-first leadership. Michel, thank you so much for being here. Welcome.
Well, thanks for hosting me, Andrew.
Absolutely. So let's jump right into it. Let's talk about engineering scale and with humanity, which sometimes is not how it's done. You've led some of the biggest infrastructure scaling efforts in the world. I mean, the stories we talked about at Cisco and Juniper during the early days and the ups and downs. I mean, you've kind of seen it all. What mindset or framework helped you lead through such massive transitions and such massive ups and downs?
You know, in one way, we were kind of trained to not follow any more books. You get to a point where the scale of the company, especially at Cisco, was such that nobody could tell us how we're going to be able to carry the flame, if you want. So my bosses at the time will say, hey, go figure out. I mean, we pay you the big bucks with your team. You know the challenge. You know where we want to land. Now, go basically land on the moon and come back if you want.
So that was
a mindset.
There was no playbooks at the time, because you mentioned it was like the second or third biggest company at the time, right? Right behind Microsoft, Cisco.
Yeah, we went in one point, the internet and the growth of the company was we were the most valuated company in the world.
Wow.
Over a period of 6 years, if you want.
People did not know that. I remember not knowing that. And that's, wow. Okay. So there was no playbook. There was, like you said, there hasn't been 100 companies that have done it. And here's the things you got to do next, right? Because a lot of us follow the playbooks and literally the books that we read, companies, how they've done it at the time. You guys were figuring out your own book, your own playbook.
Yeah. And I think if you look at the book, most of it are written with the spirit of, you're a small entrepreneur, you're going to do a startup, you're going to build a product, you're going to hit it big, go public, or get acquired. And after that, there's nothing that says what's going to happen. And I got exposed to acquisition simply because the company, and Cisco at the time, was having this philosophy that say, if engineering cannot build the new product within 2 years, or we don't have the core competency to do it, well, acquire the asset of a company, and your guy will have to figure out how to integrate the pieces and the people. So that's why, to some extent, I've never been afraid of acquisition, to some extent. I've never been afraid of partnership, because for me, that's the only way you can scale. I mean, we were doubling the size of the employee every 9 months. I mean, just thinking about hiring the people, qualify, onboarding, make them productive. So if you just rely on yourself to do all of that thing, it's never going to scale.
Wow, that's a lot. So basically, you all found a formula to getting what you need by acquiring companies. Yeah?
Yeah, and it was interesting at the beginning. Look, I was an engineer, so I thought acquiring company was like, take a look at the product, go underneath, reassemble the thing, see if there's intellectual property, and make the move or not to buy those assets or not. But then, I realized that the success will be largely around what organizational structure you're going to do. Do you leave the new acquiree on the side so you don't muck with their business? Or you bring them part of the bigger boat, sales, manufacturing, you can imagine finance, integrate them first, and then look at the processes in IT to realize that, look, at the end, if I don't do an organizational design that say in 2 years from now, who's going to lead what and how it's going to look, we will be probably failing with the acquisition. So that's the learning we got into.
What was, what did you learn? What is the right way to acquire a company, and what mistakes were made? Tell us about some of the wins from the acquisition piece, and some of the things you do differently this time around.
Well, let's go back a little bit in time. In the early days of acquisition, the fundamentals were still there. You have an entrepreneur, you have a small team, they have to show you a product. And once they have a product, minimum MVP level, if you want, minimum viable product, you want to see traction with customer. So I was used to get inserted when the company or the prospect, if I use the term, was having a momentum in the market. Then it was largely to say, okay, if we take that momentum, how is this company aligned with the bigger picture of, let's say, Cisco, Juniper, or Calix? So we're looking into, is it an ingredient to our growth? Is it an adjacent market to it? Which basically means you have to accept there's going to be difference with your business model. Or is it simply, to some extent, containing a threat that if you ignore, could bite you? Depending of the direction you take among those three doors, then the process become largely still the same. Look under the hood, what's real or what's hype. Try to talk to the people. The hardest thing is try to figure out who's really the leadership. Because a North structure doesn't mean they're the real leader of a company. You always have those people that connect everything in the company, make things happen. They don't look necessarily on the org chart right away. But what you find out is if you lose those assets, then it's almost like nobody knows how to run the boat anymore. So over time, I learned to skip some level of management, meet the teams, and then listen to them. I mean, are they excited about the acquisition, or are they basically like, oh my God, we got punished by the God type of thing? So it was a little bit of that, if you want. And then the rest was mostly a financial process. What's the equity?
Yeah.
What's the valuation?
In general, Michel, did you find that that you should leave these companies alone and let them operate, or is it truly each scenario is completely different? Sometimes you need to take over and run the company. Sometimes you need to leave them alone. In general, what is there any general advice you have?
Yeah, that's a good question. I will say, look, let's use real data if you want. When I was there for my 15 years at Cisco, we did like I think 180 acquisition.
Wow.
6 of them were left alone.
6 of them were left alone. Wow.
Yeah. For
they
a few
were that
years.
Good.
Yeah, they were that good, or we didn't understand the business model. We didn't have a channel to support it. We didn't have a sales organization that could build the trust. So especially if it was out of the networking space in the enterprise, then you're like, okay, there's maybe merits to leave it alone. But even if you may leave them alone, you have to realize that the founder or the people that invested in the company, within 2 to 3 years, they're most likely to leave because now that golden handcuff is consumed. Yes. So what I learned is, largely speaking, it was more an exercise to say they have a technology, we could reuse it, we could integrate. And I used to look at this like everything become a set of Legos. I have my Legos, they have their Legos. If I combine this way, am I getting better than individually trying to achieve the same thing?
Sure.
So it was more like integration that I learned than transformation of a company, with the caveat that in a lot of time we had achieved level of skill they didn't have. So I have to respect that our approach to supply chain, to manufacturing, to processes, to IT was kind of much bigger than the acquiring most of the time. So there was thing that I remember we say, there's thing we're willing to have a dialogue. There's thing we're going to draw the line. This is how it's going to happen. And what I learned is you better have those discussions earlier in the process. It's almost like dating to some extent.
Sure.
If you want kids and your potential wife or partner doesn't want any, well, hiding it for the next 2 years is not going to help you if you want. So there was some fundamental view about how do you see the world, how you see success, what will happen with your team, And what was also surprising is how people didn't understand, especially with startup, the dilution of their stock, if you want. How
Yes.
many times I got people coming in my office to say, "Oh, I thought I was done. I thought I never had to work, and now I realize that I didn't get the deal of the founder, or the VC took a large chunk of the valuation of the company." And that was a process where I say, "Gosh, I need to think as a human, as a leader,
Yeah.
sit in their shoes, and show them that you know what, you're gonna be in a company that can carry you to the next level. We're bigger. We're going to make a career. There's so many things you can do in this company." So there was a lot more than just like, "Okay, what are you going to do for me if you want?"
Yeah. Michelle, that you talked about 190 companies, 6 you left alone. Since we both like data, of the 190, how many were successful acquisitions and how many were failures, you think?
So if you look at success as an ROI, an investment you made 5 to 6 years from now, well, I'm probably going to get in trouble for saying that, but
It's too
I
late. They
will
can't do
say,
anything to you.
yeah, I will say probably 80% didn't have the ROI that
Wow.
the investment team at the time thought they will get. From a technology and people acquisition, I will declare it success because a lot of the people we acquire stay 5 to 10 years in the company, if not more, if you want. And they manage to have different role and position and grow and learning. So I will qualify that for success. But if you just look into, we went into so many adjacent market, we invested, look, imagine the cost of 180 company, how many billion that this thing was.
Wow.
It's not a textbook of the hardware business school, I will say.
Yeah.
What's been really the recipe is you acquire people, not tech, and technology. Rarely you acquire market.
Interesting. So the market share component of an acquisition is rare, more rare than we think.
Yeah.
You don't just gobble up all their customers because their customers can leave,
Well, I
right?
agree. But that depends also on your structure. If you're structured like a holding of company, like GE, for example,
Mm-hmm.
you
Mm-hmm.
could go now, I'm buying a nuclear reactor company. I'm buying a medical asset company. They have nothing really in common other than the logo and the structure of the company.
Sure, sure.
In the company I was, everything was around the network for the enterprise, for the
Mm-hmm.
broadband, for the service provider. So it was like adjacency, if you want. So we had some freedom into what we do, but we couldn't go and say simply this has nothing to do with the company. So you have to respect a little bit the laws of physics of your financial model.
We talked a lot about the view of the acquirer, right? The big huge multi-billion dollar company acquiring these smaller companies. How about let's flip it for a minute. Let's talk about you're an entrepreneur, you've built a company. What are some things that they should look out for when they're considering selling their company? Because there's a whole private equity world that some of my guests I've had on talked about, but how about a flip side? Like you're considering being acquired by a huge company like Cisco or Juniper or whatever. What are some things to look out for? What are things to set expectations on? Teach us a little bit about that.
Yeah, look, I had the luxury to talk to many of them in the process, and one question I will always ask them was, what was the measure of success for them?
Hmm.
And the notion was around, if your measure of success was to be acquirer, then you were having a view that it's going to be a short-lived company to some extent.
Hmm.
I will succeed on behalf of my team and my shareholder and investor, but ultimately what carry after that, it will be the problem of the company that basically make that investment. So they were not invested, I will say, long-term after a certain point of success. If they were motivated to become public or to be acquired and say, I believe we're going to help this company to go to the next level of reach or recognition in the industry, I find out those founders were really invested into what's going to happen after. They wanted to know everything around where they're going to report, the level of freedom, the level of constraint, the level of overlap, if you want,
Hmm.
because there's always an overlap between sales, service, and this and
Sure.
that. And they were largely asking me, what are you going to do with my people? Because they had a vested interest to see they're not dropping them down dry, if you want.
Nice.
So these, I will say, if you're an entrepreneur, look at success, look at beyond that, define success. What are you going to do in the next 2-3 years? Even if you stay for a short term, what you try to basically imprint in the company that acquire you. And what you think is the core value of the intellectual property that you say, don't waste that thing, don't lose it. This is the core of my business. So how you transmit that to your parent acquisition company, if you want.
Sure. Michel, in your book, which is behind you, Beyond the Code, you talk a lot about emotional intelligence and mentorship as being a critical and technical strategy. How did you come to that realization? I'm sure you've been doing this a long time. Like, when did you realize that it's all about that EQ and mentorship that's critical?
It's a good question, because if I go back in time, when I started in this thing, like an engineer, I had to write code. I have to manage people. It was largely a technical leadership thing. Can you understand what we try to build, speak the language, understand the programming rules?
Mm-hmm.
I think most of the people can operate at this level initially, because it's more about the outcome of it versus how you guide the people to get there. Past a certain level, mentoring became much more important, because I was like, suddenly, I never managed team of that size. So what do I do? I mean, for example, how do I structure for short term and long term? How do I place risk on the business? And I realized that a lot of this thing was around almost like, I don't know if you play roulette or whatever, but you have chips to put on the table.
Mm-hmm.
And nobody's going to tell you how to do it. And what you have to do is to say, can I find somebody to say, if you have my cards hands, if you want, how would you play it? What would you try to do with it? And I found out there was a lot of really senior people. They were not trying to be my coach. They were just trying to say, if I was you, I would have done this. And then I would ask them, well, give me context of why. Because the danger with somebody that's really, more senior than you, they have an answer usually. If you ask them just the answer, okay, you got something. I wanted to know, how do you get to the answer? I mean, what did you consider? What's the context of this? What was the risk? How do you evaluate reward versus, exposure, if you want? And that was what the mentoring was great about. And it was interesting. It was mentoring outside R&D. Wow. I will go and meet the folks in sales and say, hey, you sell the product. How do you feel about it? Can I meet your customer? And then say, wow. yeah. Come meet my customer. They're really mad at you, by the way.
Wow, that's funny.
Yeah. So it was things like that, is try to be in the position of somebody else and then see how they manage to succeed within the company also. Because, for example, I never dealt with CXO level. Mm. When you get close to them, they don't look at the data the same way than a first-line manager, for example.
Of course.
They're looking at outcome, risk, balance, shareholders' value, and they're going to ask you a question about the business viability versus the technology also.
Michel, this is a great lesson for leaders. One of the things that, as a really busy leader, when people come to your office looking for an answer, the right thing to do is to help them come up with the answer, right? Mm-hmm. But that takes time. So sometimes the shortcut is just telling them the answer, because it's easier. They're smiling, they're happy, they got what you needed, and you got what you needed. You got them to go and do whatever they got to do, and now you can go back to your responsibilities. But what I realized over the years is then you have a reliance issue. Now they come to you waiting for an answer, and if you don't just give it to them, now they're frustrated. They're like, I used to come to you, you used to give me answers, and I left. Now I have to sit here and come up with my own answer. I'll just do it on my own. But I think it's a really important investment as a leader to allow them to come up with the answer, to push them, to guide them to come up with the answer so they don't need you eventually. But you looked at it from the other side. You went to people outside of your direct kind of technical org, and you asked them how they came up with those answers. It's very helpful. I've never
Well,
looked at it from
it's
that angle.
interesting. It's a good observation because how many times we say don't come with problem, come with solution.
Yeah.
The reality for me was around it depends a little bit of the sense of urgency. I realized that look, there's a thing about running the business that you should be able to figure out largely on your own because you're master of your field. You're like the chef in the kitchen
Hmm.
cooking the steak, for example. You'll know how to do it. But if I say we're going to create a new type of meat and everybody needs to be on board with this thing, this is where it comes into alignment. I find out that the first thing before I ask for answer will be, do you understand the alignment of what we're trying to do? Why we're doing this? Where we want to go? And what is kind of the timeline and the effort we can put on that program? And a lot of time after that, I will go to the same thing you said. I will say, knowing that, show me what you look. How many doors did you look in front of you to get there? And why did you choose this one? And you're right. I mean, the human tendency, especially where the business pressure is higher, is just to say, go open that door there. That's the one I want you to
That's
do.
the one. Go.
Yeah, but it doesn't create any legacy, if you want, of
No.
knowledge. It just basically train the people to be dependent or codependent. And I realized that my role was much more to listen to their thinking process or train them. If they were a machine language human, I will say, I'll train them on the algorithm to make the decision so they can do better than me after that.
Absolutely. Or at least even if it's not better than you, maybe it's 80%.
Yeah.
But you have 80% times 100, 200, 300, 500 people, right? I mean, the velocity of people making good decisions on their own, that's how you get speed. That's how you get scale, is by people having the ability to think on their own and take risks and do things sometimes better than you, sometimes exactly as you, sometimes 80% of you.
Yeah.
But that's huge. Let's why did you write this book? I mean, at this point I'm guessing you're near retirement. Why
Yeah.
why did you write that
Well,
this
no,
book?
part of it was few things. It was I had so many people that say you should tell your story. And the story was largely how you end up from Quebec, chicken farmer, to be in Silicon Valley and run those teams. And I
Wow.
wanted to show to people it's not where you were born that dictate what you will become.
Yeah.
It's what you aspire to be, and then you have to take the ways to get there. And there's an element of luck, there's an element of relationship in this thing, but that was one of the motivation. I was also, look, I have children in the new millennium generation, whatever you want, a different age, and I feel that they were a little bit, thinking they're not going to have the same opportunity than I had. And I wanted to say, no, the odds are, the challenges are different, maybe. The technology are different. I know AI is a big concern for new generation about, can I be employee or not? But it was like, I wanted you to understand all these are wave. They come and go, and ultimately is what you're going to do with them. So there was a part of it of sharing this process of thinking, how do you approach not having a book to follow, for example. Take risks, take initiative. Second dimension was around, okay, now you made it. You're in the big company, but it's not a startup anymore. Now you have to try to become a market leader, or you have to dominate your industry. Well, guess what? You're going to have to change how you operate. You used to be a specialist. You're going to have to become a generalist. You're going to have to be able to look at return, investment, risk, partnership, acquiring, developing yourself. Well, how do you do that? And that's why the notion of portfolio management became something I like to share with people. Because most of the people, especially in engineering, if you say, hey, what's your budget? They're going to answer, well, I need 20 people. That's hilarious. That was always a discussion, and say, no, let's not talk about this is the how. I want to understand, knowing the span that we have, knowing that we have to carry revenue of X next year to succeed, How are you going to basically allocate your resource? Resource are people. And how are you going to invest to be able to grow, take risk, partner, and do this? That is not taught in any book, to be honest
Interesting.
with you. And leadership tends to be more about the book at the CXO level, the founder that take the big risk. I said that wasn't my life. I wasn't at that level. I was more around how do I make what I need, my commitment to the company, and how I can allow my people to experiment, try new idea, as opposed to they live to work for my competitor, for example. So
Yeah.
part of it was to do this, and the last thing was more around okay, how many times, as you say, I'm a little bit like on the sunset side, moving forward. How many times I had discussion with people is I like to retire, and I say to do what?
Yeah.
Do you know what you want to be? And when it's not financially driven, and I was always surprised that there's a lack of goal and clarity from people. They kind of know they will not like to work
Yeah.
all the time,
Yeah.
but where are they going to use their spend? I said, what are you going to do when you have not a meeting, a Zoom meeting to deal with? Where are you going to spend your time? Community, do a startup, advise new people, invest in time,
It it's
train.
it sounds sexy, but there's so many. It's funny you said that. So many people at 40, 42, 45 years old have exited their business and they're like excited to retire, and then a year later they're
They
they're
come back.
they're come back, they're consulting, they're starting a new
Hmm.
company, they're working for smaller companies to help them scale. I mean, you still need something to go to, something to do, something to keep your brain fresh. So that's really good advice. Is like I'm now, even though I haven't been there, is I'm asking people like, oh, this really exciting goal. Like, what are you gonna do after? I don't know, travel. How long? I
Yeah.
mean, I just traveled I had an amazing trip with my family, 2 weeks. But okay, it's like 2 weeks. It's cool. Let's get back to our normal life, right? Let's go. Let's get some smog. Let's get some stress in our systems. We miss it, you know. Um.
But
So
also, I think the working environment is changing. To your point, it's like I think we went too far to some extent, and I'm a little bit biased on this to say experience is not recognized. Passive, it become a liability to some extent. And I'm
yeah,
like, no, I think if you design it well, if you're a young entrepreneur or you're in your 40s, go get some people that are going to give you fractional time to give you an independent view, give you an advice, give you this and this. Yes, they'll be motivated to carry the flame with you to see the journey, but they don't have necessarily the burden of running everything like
sure.
probably I was in my early days. You know, I wanted to touch everything. I had to, I changed this thing a little bit. Like I realized success is more around you're legacying or training people better than you if you want, and just watch them to see what they're going to do with it. It's fantastic.
One of the coolest things that I see is you have kind of a young first time NBA coach, let's say, or NFL coach. If they're smart, what do? They go get a 65-year-old former, legendary coach to be their assistant coach so they can learn from them. I had a guest, Chip Miller, who's an author of a book, a really good book, but he was the kind of elder statement, helping the Airbnb founders scale their business, and he was like the adult in the room. He said they hired me to be the adult in the room. It's really interesting, right? I mean, I don't know if he phrased it that way, but I mean, he must have had a huge impact on these brilliant young guys that sometimes you just don't know. You're 25, 27, 28 years old, you're brilliant. Doesn't matter. You need someone to guide you, like a big brother almost. So I think that's really good advice too. So you can become that after you retire.
Well, and I think especially if you're not a threat to some extent, if you can establish the boundary of what this partnership is going to be, let's say with a smaller team and your team, etc. If they see your role like an advisor and somebody that say, look, let me share with you what I think we need to do, and
Yep.
then give you the since you're the bosses, you have the choice of making that thing. I think it gives you an independent view, which is not biased, motivated by success, as opposed to, wow, I really want to tell you that this is bad, but
Yeah.
I'm worried about my job to some extent.
Yes.
Uh, you
Michelle,
know,
what's the biggest team you've ever managed?
I have like maybe 4,500 people reporting to me.
Oh my
and
God.
maybe another 1,500 contractor.
Wow. So upwards of 6,000 people.
Yeah,
I
and
mean,
it's
talk
funny
about,
you say that because I thought my job was to know the name of everybody. And I realized I can't.
no way.
And then I realized if I'm going to have such a big team, they deserve at least that I meet them on the ground because we're global. There was US, there was EMEA, there was obviously Asia and India. And if I do a decent job, I'll go a couple of times a year, visit those sites, sit with them, not try to tell them what to do. I want you to do this, but more like, are you living this on the ground? And these were fantastic event for me.
Yeah, you don't need to know people's names. You need to be able to sit down and talk to them and understand their world.
Yeah, and the question they will throw at me, I was like, oh my God, I can't believe you asking me this thing. Was like, there was no constraint. It was like, this is the way I feel. You happen to be the exec in the room. I'm going to put you
Wow.
on the spot. Tell me what would you do? And they were tough sometimes,
Yeah.
especially when there was hard time to say, well, why we didn't do that. A lot of people were about that. We make a call. I understand. It was a bad one. You realize it was a bad one, by the way, Mr. Exec. And if you have your chance to undo it, what will you do? And
Wow.
a lot of time I will say, probably nothing. Because at the time,
That was
we
the
had
best
an
decision.
input from, it was the best decision. I
Yeah,
don't live in the past. I don't,
that's smart. Yeah,
yes, I mean,
that's huge. You got to constantly make decisions, right? You can't
and
sit there
pivot.
and yeah, and pivot. Exactly.
Yeah.
That's huge. Let's talk a little bit about the kind of the inventor's dilemma, right? Balancing kind of innovation with rigor. When companies hit that multi-million to now multi-billion dollar phase, what are the most common traps that kill innovation, right? Because in the beginning, you're innovating, you're inventing, you're creating, and things are going really well. And now there's what are some of the traps that stop you from constantly innovating?
Well, I think the way I describe this will be I always got worried about milking the cow to a
Hmm.
point that you think it will never end. And I think what's happened is when you're successful, you become dominant in a space or a market leader in some area. The natural tendency is to don't do anything to break that.
Mm.
And you
Playing
can
not to
imagine,
lose.
yeah,
Basically
play
playing
not to
not to
lose,
lose. Yeah.
run the business, manage the risk. You know that every 2, 3 years I'll have to refresh the product. And that's a danger zone because the people that try to beat you at that game, they're not going to try to match you. They're going to try to basically, you know, quantum leap what you do, knowing you have your own boundaries that say you're not going to do it. So I think one of the things that I was taught by one a mentor to do was like, if you really want to see where the risk is, get the team on your side playing the competitor and ask them how they will try to torpedo your empower if you want. And it was always fascinating to see, really, they will try to do that? Yeah, because they know that if you do this, you're going to have a constraint on this or you're going to be worried about that. So that's one thing is to say, in one point
Mm.
of time, don't assume you're eternal. Don't become complacent. Don't be paranoid that somebody is going to quantum leap. And then the second thing I will say, technology disruption is every 6, 7 years. The other trap is you wait too late to touch it,
Mm.
experiment with it. I mean, look at AI right now.
Yeah.
I mean, if you're still in denial this thing could happen or not, you're already late a little bit.
Yes.
But if you betting too much the farm that it's going to cure everything,
Yeah.
you're ignoring your core business. So I think you're back into if the technology succeed, what am I going to do with it?
Yeah.
And to some extent, what will be the impact on my run rate business? And that's, in my mind, what if scenario. You have to be able to evaluate the different angle if you want. So what I see people a lot of time is they don't want to look into there could be an alternative reality of today. I mean, and part of it is because I think executives get rewarded largely in a certain point of growth to just be predictable. You know,
Sure.
beat the revenue by one penny if you want. You know,
Yeah.
Guarantee, make your commitment. Don't overachieve it. Put it in the bank, pipeline, next quarter and the third. As opposed to saying there will be a point of time where the revenue will hit the wall and then go down by 40%. Then what do I do? That's the healthy paranoia that I will say. My earliest mentor, they were all like that. They were all looking at this. It's a good ride. Let's prepare the next one.
I feel like when you have an organization that large, I mean, for you, it was 6,000 people. I mean, that's a lot of complexities, right? Your CEO might have been dealing with 40,000 people, 80,000 people. I don't know. But what ends up happening is you spend 90% of your time focused internally versus looking externally, looking for innovation, researching, really understanding your competitors, understanding what's down the pipe in 5 years. And I feel like that's a trap in itself, right? Because there's so much drama and internal stuff you got to deal with that you stop talking to your customers, you stop talking to your competitors, you stop researching, and so I feel like that alone is a trap. Do you agree?
I agree. It's a good observation because to some extent, one of my key learning is nobody was managing my agenda. When you really think about it, you talk about, I need to allocate a percentage of my time or my team to investigate X, Y, and Z. Now, what's the tendency is to think everything is to do is to run the business. So that I think the people that fail, they're going to put 90% of their time making sure they're running the business, as opposed to say, by then you should have people better at you to kind of run the crank if you want.
Yeah.
I mean, if we go back to the engineering kitchen, the chef is not there all the time to make sure that the kitchen is running. He's going outside, he's listening to the new wave, he wants the Michelin star, he wants this and that. He's looking at creating the new. And I think that's the discipline you need to have. You need to manage your time, especially email, to avoid to be consumed and burying the day-to-day. And then everything, if you reach that point, become more like, how many times I'm sure you ask yourself, why am I having those meetings?
Yeah.
Yeah.
Oh, yeah.
Yeah.
There's days you might work 12 hours and walk out with zero accomplished. And then there's days where you're like, I have 3 hours, I'm going on a trip, I got to get, and you walk away feeling like you've moved the world. I mean, it's you get stuck kind of responding to emails and getting stuck dealing with BS, and so that could be huge. Let me ask you a question. What does predictive innovation cycle look like in practice? Because that's got to be something to look at.
Well, I mean, part of it is if you understand the market and you understand your competitive value. I go back into, if I understand my intellectual property, which basically means why is my mousetrap so compelling that most of the market is going to look into, I want that. The moment you get that thing, what's interesting is you have a framework. You can see, okay, if I do the mousetrap, I know I'm going to have to extend it to make it better. But if I have the right engagement with customer, with VCs, with partner, and advisor, I should be able to continue to modify that mousetrap. And then I need to evaluate that consume how many people and budget. If I'm able to answer this, the rest is the fun part. And then I have 10% to try new idea, to go where the company don't even know. Look, there was time that I was bold enough to say, I'm going to hire 100 engineers. They have no idea what they're going to do.
Yeah.
And I realized I could do it because people don't see their commitment, not their name. And it was interesting. A lot of this was idea that went nowhere, but man, were they motivated to get there. It was almost like you achieved so much seniority and recognition in the company. Your gift is going to give you the time to innovate, to play with.
So this was like a little separate team that was just trying to create new products.
Yeah, stealth mode if you want. Mm-hmm. And I realized that, wow, when they hit something big, it's really interesting. It's good for the market. So why not trying to make it part of the product life cycle? And that's why we tried to do different things, Big Bang Day, Innovation Day. But it was really interesting if you say to the engineering or the team, forget the product management now. I'm giving you, 3 days. go out, disappear, and come back with things that will improve your life or the life of the company or make it more productive or bring more revenue for us. You will be surprised how people knows what doesn't work. It was quite amazing. And then my only contribution of this thing is now that I have like American Idol, I have rate all those programs, I have the top 3. I'm better do something with their time and idea. And that was the hardest thing. Are we willing to fund now that we know? And I had a mixed success with that. I had peers to say, well, it was a good exercise for motivation and team building. And I was like, the heck, it's not an exercise. They put their soul into, if we do this, the thing can create value. Maybe we should listen to them a little bit. But I think you can do that.
One of the things you did is you kind of got rid of the box that they're stuck in, right? Because a lot of times the people are stopping the innovation before it comes out because I go, we can't do that because of this. If you eliminate that and give them just almost a clean slate, nothing to bound them, then they're going to be a lot more creative than if you say within all these boundaries try to create something innovative. They can't. All they're going to do is a small little feature enhancements, incremental, which is great too. There's a lot of value in that, but it's not a huge wins.
Well, it's interesting. You're right on this thing because how many times I say, well, that's not the way we do it.
Yeah.
And you ask the people who told you that, well, that's the way it's been done since the beginning of time.
Yeah.
And I was like, what was the context of the decision at that time? I don't know. But I know we cannot do it. And that's where you need to say, when you're hearing those signs, do something about it.
Yeah.
And maybe it's time to reshuffle the deck on the boat, or it's time to inject different type of leadership of different people.
Yeah.
Otherwise, that's all they're going to do, cook the same meal.
Well, again, it comes down from the top, right? If the top told you not to take risks, this is what you end up with. You have a bunch of people scared and constrained. How do you eliminate internal friction while still pushing speed and scale? Like, what are some of the things you learned over the years?
I think you're better off addressing the elephant in the room. I think part of it was like, look, there's data that lead into a decision of X, Y, and Z. First, go explain which data source that you took and which one you decided to ignore and why. Provide context into what was your priority at the time or what was success looks like. I think it's important to share that. And once you have the decision, try to see, okay, how do I line up people behind the plan? And one of the things I learned is if there's people that don't believe in it, they're toxic, take them out. I mean, it sounds harsh the way I do it.
Yeah.
But if you want to generate a passive-aggressive culture, the people that say, oh, I'm buying in the plan, but man, outside the meeting is like, whoa, that's not me. That's the executive at the top. They're the cancer of an organization to some extent. And people knows about them. And what's hard sometimes is they might be really valuable people, but they're just toxic for people to engage, collaborate. I mean, I'm not a social worker, but some of them, their skill were like, my God. I mean, you need to find something else to do.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah. Those people will become anchors, right? They'll keep their anchors in your boat, your ship, and they're not. You even if your boat's moving, it's going to move very.
They're going to drag you. They're going to drag you.
You gotta cut those anchors, no matter how talented they are, and get them out of the way because they'll slow you down. Michel, you now work with CEOs, I believe, and boards, right? Going through kind of inflection points. That's what your book should be. What patterns signal that they're ready or not for scale? Like when you really observe kind of what they're doing.
I give you maybe especially smart company because I'm spending my time on company that try to disrupt the industry, if you want. What's common with them, one observation, they're so focused on revenue. I think for them, a lot of them, success is about, I'm adding customer, I'm adding revenue. If I'm going to show this RAM to an investor, I can get funding from the VC, I can do different things. And really, if you start to talk also about, here's my cost of sale, here's my productivity, here's my return of investment, here's my margin. So when you see people that beyond revenue can also answer what's their plan to increase or do better in each one of those things. I mean, you don't need 20 KPI. We need
Yeah.
4 or 5 that say not only my business is sound, but my burnout rate. How many times I see this thing? What's your burnout rate? Well, is this? Well, that's 3 times your revenue. Let's do the math.
Wow.
You have
Wow.
a
Wow.
fund
Wow.
time, a funding of X. You're burning 3 times your revenue. You're growing
Oof.
fast your revenue. There's no inflection point. And at one point of time, it's laws of physics will apply to you. You go bankrupt. And
Wow.
it's fascinating that a lot of them trap into, yeah, but it's going to be a bigger market. I'm going to get more VCs money. I'm going to broaden
Sure.
everything. I say, no, start having the fundamental really fasten your company under control. That's an observation also. And the tough thing also with smart leader in the early stage is they're not too good about delegation. I
Yeah.
mean, I call it the Lord of the Ring. Okay, I'm going to give you the ring. No, 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 no. I'm going to keep you. No, no, no. Run every decision to me. And that's the thing. That I like people that knows they need to hire a team and they're going to have to empower them and trust them with check and balance, obviously. And they have to do that early in the game.
That's Michel. I feel like the Amazon way really hurt businesses in a way, right? Because Amazon lost money for what, 20, 30 years, right? It was a long time.
Oh,
Uh,
yeah.
and and so it gave this false, I don't want to call it hope, but some false narrative that you don't have to make a profit. So all that VCs are going to look at is your MMR, right? Your monthly, recurring revenue, or your ARR, and that's
Yeah.
all that matters. So it doesn't matter how much money you're losing; it's about how your growth revenue wise. And sometimes that's not a scalable business. It's like you have to
Well, I
first,
think we're all victim of this because I remember in the .com, because that was the birth of the internet,
yeah,
if you want. Look, we used to acquire company on paper.
yeah,
I mean, on an idea, on a PowerPoint. That's
yeah,
pretty amazing. And then I will look at this to say, okay, they're going to have to build a product. They have to go to market. Why do we want to pay, X billion for that?
yeah,
And the people will come from an M&A or from finance and say, it's free. The valuation of the stock will double in 2 years. Don't worry about it. We don't have to burn any cash.
yeah.
And I
Wow,
was like, wow.
it's weird.
So So at the end, what also I would like as an advice to share is I like when there's no safety net. I mean, it's great to have money in the bank. It's great to have the funding to make mistake. Don't take me wrong. But
Yeah,
if you, to some extent, don't care about the outcome, then ask yourself what your employee will care about it. I mean,
yeah.
human
That's
nature.
interesting. That's really interesting. Sometimes it's like you take these crazy tech businesses and you want to bring them back to reality and say a normal business, let's say a plumbing business or a retail business, has to just go with unit economics, right? Like it's like
Yeah.
basic, can you at least get 10% profit? Now your business is scalable. Now do it on a faster, harder, longer thing. But that's, we live in la la land sometimes and we don't think about that because we just think about the next funding round, right? If I get my ARR to 1 million, boom, I'm gonna get 20 million in money to now scale my business without really having any fundamentals of what does that $1 million ARR look like from a
No,
profit
you're right. I
perspective.
think, and that's why I think a word of advice is people need to understand the financial of a company.
Yeah,
What is profitability means, what's the minimum to survive. And you raise an example which is interesting. I look at the cloud, for example. How do I know that my product is not scaling well? Is when somebody will say, hey, we need to add another cluster to scale. I mean, every month. And I'm like, why do you need that? Oh, compute, CPU, there's a lot of processing and this and that. I say, yeah, but what make you think is the system needs it versus your
mm,
design is so poor that you're just putting band-aid, lipstick on the pig. I mean, it's like, and that's the thing. I think there's some kind of basic thing, laws of physics, independently of the market you are, that need to be observed
yeah.
and mastered by people, if you want.
Michelle, your career has spanned the rise of the internet, like you just talked about, to the dawn of AI, which we talked about. What's changed the most about tech leadership or leadership in general over that arc?
Well, I think the motivation are different. I mean, I was born at a time where success was largely, reward from a stock level or from a compensation standpoint. I think right now the new generation is more global. They care about things like sustainability. They care
Yeah.
about other things that wasn't part of the DNA that I have to face at the time. And I think what's changed is the way you motivate people is quite different. You have to reach them. And part of it is because of COVID and the remote worker age is I still believe that you need to meet people on the ground. Uh, Not doing because you must do it because it looks good to do it, but we're human. We need to exchange. We need to know each other. We need to see, what's happening. I'd like to know about your family. I mean, basic stuff like that. And look, I'm an introvert. It's not like I will spend tons of time doing these things, but there's a bare minimum around what's the fabric of this company is about. Why are you spending your time? How can I help you? And by the way, you say you have a concern. I mean, shoot. I mean, don't hide it. Don't send me an email to tell me that. So you know how to reach me. And that's another thing is I was born in an age where I like the internet, but I will take the phone.
Yeah.
When something bother me, like I know your phone. I'm gonna
Yeah.
call you.
That's
And
huge.
these days it's almost like, well, let's dialogue, let's set up a meeting and let's have some action item to follow up. And then say, no, 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 no. Why? You brought it down. Let's arch the solution and move on from now. So there's things like that have changed from a leadership. I think the other thing is I don't think company can survive without partnership. Um, Open source. There's a lot about tools that exist, especially in AI, that
Yeah.
allow you to make decisions faster, assuming you have the right data on it. I think there's so many things now which is offered to human to basically be more productive.
Oh my God.
Uh,
I've never seen one of the biggest things with AI is you no longer have any excuses not to be productive, except the ones you put on yourself, which is I won't use AI products. I won't communicate people, like you said, pick up the phone and actually connect with people. I mean, or I'm just gonna hide behind my emails, right? Like I feel like
yeah,
there's so much strength in sitting in front of someone, if it's possible, face to face and accomplishing things, or picking up the phone and just moving things versus back and forth emails. So I definitely agree with that. Um, if you had to distill your leadership philosophy into few core principles, what would they be? Give us like three main things. I mean, you've alluded to it during our entire conversation, but
okay,
what
so
would be
I'll give
three?
you the first one. My dad, which was a farmer,
Hmm.
told me to have he used to call it a moral compass. You see, in life, you have to decide what's good or wrong, what
Hmm.
is the line you cannot cross,
Yeah.
and largely because you won't be able to live with yourself or see
Yep.
yourself in the mirror. And I think that's a principle that incorporate get tests a lot. How many times I could have made decision that say, if you do this, okay, you're gonna screw that team, but it's gonna be good for your organization and this and
Hmm.
that. And I was like, whoa, whoa, you kind of tell me everybody is disposable. And I had some of my peers that say it's like a risk game. You move that
Yeah.
thing on the chess game, you lose casualty of war, move on.
Sure.
So moral compass was one. The second one is I learned the hard way that if you're going to do something, do it right the first time.
Mm.
This idea that you can do 80-20 on everything or 70-30 and come back after, never going to happen because you will be motivated by more growth, more pressure, more revenue. You're never going to go back in time with this thing.
Interesting.
The third one will be learn to place your bet. No, carry the business. That's the short term. Pay the bills. Then look at expansion. Look at the strategy 3-4 years from now, and look at people that say what are they going to do to displace us. And when you start having healthy paranoia, you're less complacent. You're less
Yeah.
arrogant. You don't have the Mount Olympus syndrome where you live above the human and you think that,
Yeah.
whoa, nothing will reach me there. Uh, Humility or be humble, that's a big thing. And the last thing is probably because my English was not my first language, I had to listen
Mm.
because I couldn't, in the early stage, speak the same way that if it was in French. So I had to absorb people talking to me. And at the end, I was like, hey, I listened to you. What about that? I didn't have to use a lot of word. Listening is what I feel people are missing the most. They're good to broadcast. They
Yeah.
broadcast their idea. They say, hey, we have a good interaction. You nod your head. That's not a dialogue. I mean, you're like a TV in front of me. You know?
That's funny. Michel, it's. I feel like your disadvantage was actually a huge advantage because both the fact that English was your second language, sure, but two, really the introverted component of who you are makes you more of an observer and I used to watch my kids interact. One of them was like a little tornado. I would like plant them and he would just run around, make like 6 friends and 12 enemies and come back. And my daughter would just she would observe and and only approach one or two people, and then she would build these like more lasting deeper relationships. It was really really interesting. So as an introvert you turned that into an advantage, I feel like, right?
Well,
Like
and also what you learn is I'm not the person that react like I have to analyze, I have to maintain my composure. Every time I lose a gasket, and don't take me wrong, sometimes I do, um, was more like in front of my team. That's a rule. You know, you take the worst of the situation. You say, okay, we're going to do something about it. Here's what I intend to do, or we're going to do with the team. But at the end, you're like, what am I going to do? Yell at them? I mean, we're all on the boat at that point, and we make a bet and backfire on us. Okay, now
Amazing.
we need to get back on track with the boat somewhere.
I
So
love it.
let's do it. Yeah.
Michelle, your book sounds great. There's tons of learnings there. Like, where do people, how do people get your book? How do people connect with you if they want this type of inflection advice? I already have an intro in mind where a company is they're in the AI space and their core product is doing fine, but really what's going to get them to the 10x is a secondary product. And I feel like I want to do an intro.
Mm.
But where can people find you?
Well, look, the book is on Amazon Kindle. It's easy. You do a search
Hmm,
on Beyond the Code with my name, Michel Langlois, and
great.
you'll see it right away. On LinkedIn, that's the ways that natural for me for people to connect. Everything is on my profile to reach out, the website, and if people want to have time, I finally find people capable to set up a website where people can do calendar with me and reach out. And
Right.
if there's a great idea, it's like, okay, let's explore it. That's the fun part. Like you said, I'm in at the stage where, wow, I can get people reaching me now to say, hey, can I help?
Yeah,
As
that's
opposed to,
amazing.
you know, make just a living of something. So it's cool. It's a good gig.
Michelle, give us your favorite book
It's
besides your
comic.
own.
So the funny thing is, I'm a comic book person.
Ah, okay.
So a lot is, I mean, part of it, and in Canada, we used to, heroes will come save the world and all of those things. So I like comic book. I have many of them that I like. And look, on the business, Jeffrey Moore was a big inspiration for me.
Okay.
He's a guy that did, Crossing the Chasm
Yes.
and what you do with, so many problem related to growing and scaling your business. So he's been an influencer. I had the chance to talk with him during my days at Cisco and exchange viewpoints. So there's foundation like this and writing code. I still read writing code
Wow.
because I like the techniques. I was curious to see what things like AI will change on the process of writing code or testing code or scaling code. And I think we have to go back to learning the principle of you have starvation of resource or compute and how do you build system that can make decision a little bit with more constraint than you use today. Because I
Great.
think that's the only way you can scale things.
I love
So
it. Michel, thank you for being both, for bringing both the technical kind of depth and human clarity in today's tech leaders need. Again, for those who want to go deeper, grab his book. I know I'm going to, and connect with him on LinkedIn and see if you can pick his brain. Thank you so much for being here. You've added a ton of value.
Thank you. Thanks for your time.
Thank you so much, Michel. It's been a pleasure.
Bye.
Bye. And that brings us to the end of another great episode of the Tech Leaders Playbook. I want to thank you for joining us and hope you took away some valuable insights to apply in your professional journey. Don't forget to subscribe on your preferred podcast platform so you don't miss out on the next great conversation. I promise it'll be good. If you enjoyed today's episode, we'd appreciate if you could leave us a review. Your feedback not only helps us improve, but it also helps others discover the podcast. Better leaders mean better working environments. Better working environments leads to happier people. Remember, a rising tide lifts all boats. I'm Avita Santablian, and this has been the Tech Leaders Playbook. Keep leading, keep learning, keep giving, and I'll see you on the next one. Until then, stay inspired, my friends.